Hi, welcome to my channel. This video is going to be about finding the right motorcycle for yourself, how to pick out the right bike. And the reason I'm creating this video is because I am a motorcycle enthusiast, and I have been all my life. I have owned many bikes and spent tens of thousands of dollars trading bikes and purchasing bikes. So I have a lot of experience, and I have figured out how to get the right bike and which is the best bike. And so I go to forums, I visit websites and read what the motorcycle journalists have to say in their bike reviews, and I go to forums and I see in the forums the same questions over and over again from inexperienced riders or riders who have no experience and they want to get into motorcycle riding, and they say, which is the best bike? Or they'll present two bikes, A and B, and which one is better than the other one? Should I get this bike or should I not get this bike? It's always the same question. So I want to try to help new riders and inexperienced riders to pick out the right bike and let you know which is the best bike. Okay, now there is no best bike, and you got to come. I don't care what people tell you. There is no best bike. There is a bike that is best for you, and people are different. And so one person's best bike or right bike is not necessarily yours. So there's some evaluation to do. And on many websites, the journalist websites, for the magazines, and those websites, you are not going to get an opinion that's going to really help you. Okay, the reason why is you have to consider the scope of the review of those professional journalists. They're ex-racers, track racers, and they have a specific set of skills and specific experiences, and they love a specific type of bike because they're racers. I mean, you have to love it to get into that, right? And so they're looking for things that you're not going to be looking for, that you're not going to need to consider. What they're considering is they love bikes with the highest horsepower, and that's their favorite, and so they're always going to have great things to say because they gravitate there. And they're going to consider the things like the going into a curve really fast and coming out of a curve really fast, and they're going to evaluate the bike's ability to do that, and they're going to get into shocks, the rear shocks and the front shocks, and how the bike holds a line. And if you read their articles or listen to their videos, watch their videos, they're going to gravitate there, and they're going to talk a lot about that. And then the fluff, the websites that throw the fluff out there, are the stats of a bike. I mean, I've read so many articles over the years, just endless articles, and they all say the same thing about new bikes and whatnot. They just give a list of the specs, and then they fill in between those specs with a bunch of fluff, and you come down, all you end up knowing is the horsepower and the torque and how much the bike weighs, how the engine is put together, and et cetera, what shocks and what calipers they use on the brakes, and et cetera. And that's not going to help you. So I'm going to share with you what's going to help you. The first thing that you have to do, the first two things that you have to figure out, because there's so many bikes out there, you are limited. There are so many bikes, you have to limit the field down because you can't test ride all of them. So you got to start limiting at the very beginning. First question, how much you can afford. Second question, can you leverage the weight of that bike around in your garage into and out of a parking spot and on an incline. So if you buy a bike that really costs too much, if you made it work, you figured out how to do it, you got the money, but you knew you overextended yourself, then that's a liability on that bike. And everybody loves their motorcycle when they first buy it. They love it, it's fun, it's great, it was a good decision. And then reality sets in down the road, and you start really forming a bond or not forming a bond with your bike. And if you look at that bike and you say to yourself, oh, it's too much of a hassle to get on it, because you know that you don't have the strength, or your feet won't plant on the ground hard enough to leverage the weight of that bike, then you're not going to want to ride it. And if you're always looking over your shoulder about the money, you're going to you're not going to want to ride it. You want to get rid of it. So both of those things can be liabilities. You got to be able to plant your feet enough that you can leverage the weight of that bike to get around and not drop it, and you don't pay too much. Once you answer those two questions, and how do you know that? Well, you go in, you find out how much the dealer wants for the bike, and then you sit on the bike and you evaluate the balance and the weight, how that bike carries its weight, and where your feet sit. Now, once you get that out of the way, now you got to start asking yourself why you want to ride, and that is going to be the main factor in finding the best bike for you and the right bike. Okay, motorcycles today are reliable, so reliability is not an issue. You're not going to get a bike that's unreliable. Now, everybody can get a lemon, whether you're buying a car or a motorcycle or whatever. You can get a lemon, okay. But I'm talking about generally the days of unreliability are over. Bikes now, most of them don't use carburetors. Some dual sports still do, but they use fuel injectors. Now the thing that will affect liability down the road is electronics. Okay, the more electronics, just like a car. Once automobile dealers vendors started introducing computer chips into cars, the reliability factor changed. They introduced fuel injectors, so carburation was no longer an issue, trying to get a cold engine to crank or flooding it. They got better over time with air conditioners and the condensers and all that kind of stuff. But then they introduced the microchips, and you started to see cars in the dealerships not for mechanical issues but for electronic issues. And so now you're going to see the same thing with motorcycles as they introduce more and more electronics. From what I gather in all my evaluations and research, KTM and BMW are leading the way in adding electronics to motorcycles. And so if you're going to have problems, you're going to have more problems with KTM and BMW, and it's going to be because of electronics. And you will see, you hang out in the forums and you'll start to pick that up too. But I'm telling you here, so just something to consider. Now, ask yourself why you want to ride. Are you riding to commute? Are you riding to ride with your buddies because they have bikes and you don't want to be left out? Are you riding for image, either to look cool, or you're an adrenaline junkie, or and you want to push the limits of your body and the limits of safety? Or are you wanting to get a motorcycle that's very expensive to impress your friends about how much money you have? And be very honest, okay? Because you're the one buying the bike. Or none of those apply, and you're simply just riding for pleasure, to get away, to be alone, to explore, and just for pleasure between you and the motorcycle and the environment. So first, if you're commuting, that's a very simple answer for which bike to buy. Buy one that gets the best gas mileage. 250s up to 650s, that's the range. Okay, depending on whether you're riding back roads in your commute or in town, 250 or a 500 is fine. If you're riding more on the freeway or the interstate, your speeds are going to be higher, 65, 70, 75, then a minimum you would need would be a 500, and if you spend more time on the freeway, then a more suitable bike would be a 650. 250s get in the 70s, the 500 gets in the 60s, the 650 gets in the 50s. Once you start going below that, you're starting to approach the gas mileage of a good compact car, and I don't know that you're really saving any money that way, and it's a lot more inherent danger in riding a motorcycle. You have not only the weather, but the risk in traffic of being hit and being killed. I mean, guys die every day. That's just a given. So you always want to limit the risk. It's inherently dangerous to ride a motorcycle, but you want to limit the risks if you care, about your safety. So that's a pretty simple decision. Buy the bike gets the best gas mileage. Riding with your buddies, if that's your main reason for riding, then the answer is simple. Get the bike that they have. Ride what they ride. If they ride Harleys, get a Harley. If they ride super sports or sport bikes, get one of those. If they ride dual sports, get one of those. If they ride adventure bikes, get one of those. Just get what they have. Buy what you can afford. Find one that you can afford. Don't worry about the engine type, twin cylinder, triple, inline four. They're all going to be, I'm talking about the sport bikes, they're all going to be fast. They're all going to be quick. Don't worry about buying the exact same bike that your buddies ride. Or I mean, maybe if they all ride the same thing, then get what they have. Okay, so that's not a hard decision. Just get the class of bike that they have, and then get what you can afford and what you can, what you can, how you can touch, you get your feet down, as we discussed earlier. If you are riding for image, then the definitive tough guy look is a Harley. If you're riding to impress your friends with money, then the definitive money bike is a BMW, and the particular BMW is a GS6 1250. It doesn't have to be that bike, but the most expensive bikes on the market are the Harleys because of the customization. Maybe not necessarily the initial price of the bike, what you initially pay, but once you customize them, if you customize, you're gonna put out some big money. The adventure bikes are very expensive, not because they're better bikes than other classes of bikes, but because the retired guys, the guys who are entering retirement, they've got all the money they're ever going to have. They've got much of the money they've made all their life, and they can afford to go into a dealership, and the dealer says, okay, this bike is for sale at this price, and they can play around a little bit, but they're really not trying to work him down. They don't have to. They got the money, so they just buy the bike. And the bike is in high demand because those guys, the word adventure in the phrase adventure touring or adventure bike, the word adventure is what they're after. This is the last hurrah for those guys, okay, before they're too feeble to ride. And it's a romantic idea to go out and explore the world, and they see all these videos and they want to do that. They go in and buy these really expensive bikes because they believe that's what they have to have. And so the price goes up for you and me, because it's in demand. If you and I don't want to pay that much for an adventure bike, then there's a white-haired guy that's going to come in and lay the money down. That's just the truth, folks. So if you want to impress people with money, then buy a BMW and buy an adventure bike. Okay, now riding for pleasure, if that's your reason, you don't care about going fast, you don't care about impressing other people, you're not trying to get a certain look, you're not buying for commuting, you just want to ride for pleasure. You want to get away, you want to explore the back roads, you want to maybe do some extended touring, just you want to ride for pleasure, then that's a much harder decision as to which bike to get. Now, some things you've got to consider. Torque, anything that affects the pleasure of riding, if you have to consider, whether it's a benefit or a liability, and then you do the cost-benefit analysis on that, and you go with the bike where the benefits outweigh the cost, because they've all got benefits and they've all got cost, and you have to do that analysis as to what you're willing to accept as a liability and how bad you want that plus in that bike, that pro. Okay, let's talk about torque and horsepower. You're gonna hear that stat horsepower all over the internet, and such a big deal is made about it. And why is that? Well, let's talk about both torque and horsepower. We'll take torque first because they're sisters. Torque is how hard a bike pulls when you crack open the throttle. Okay, that's that pull. That is really fun. I like torque. That's how hard it pulls. The horsepower is how hard or how long you feel that pull. Okay, there's something called a torque curve, and it begins at a certain RPM in every bike, and it ends and stops pulling at a certain RPM. Now, the torque is relative to engine size, so the bigger the engine, the more torque, the harder it's going to pull. Regardless of where it's in the power band, when it starts to pull, it's going to pull harder. Horsepower is not relative to engine size, so you can have a big bike with lower horsepower. A Harley is a big engine, lots of gobs of torque, but less horsepower than, say, a 1200 cc Harley. Got less horsepower than a 600 cc sport bike. So torque, how hard it pulls; horsepower, how long it pulls. Now, the characteristics of different classes of bikes within that scope. Sport bikes, they have really high horsepower, and so that means they're going to get in their torque curve and they're going to pull for a long time. They're going to get into it higher in the RPM range, in the mid, let's say 500, 600, 700 RPM. That's when it's really going to start pulling. You have to get it up that high, and then it's going to pull all the way up till 12, 13, 14,000 RPM. The characteristic feeling of a sport bike's torque and horsepower is that the bike is just going to pull and pull and pull and hope and eventually pull out. Your hands are going to release and you're going to fall off the back of the bike. That's kind of the feeling, the characteristic feeling. With say a Harley or a cruiser, not just a Harley, but even the Japanese cruisers, those are mainly V-twin engines. The characteristic there is low horsepower and high torque, meaning they're going to pull really hard, but they're going to start pulling low in the power band, like 3,000 RPM, and by 6,000 or 7,000 RPM, it's over. Now, the feeling is not that they're trying to pull and pull and pull until your hands let go. The feeling of a sport or a cruiser is that when you crack open the throttle, it wants to give you whiplash. It wants to just buck right then and crack your neck and just buck you off a bike, just like a bull or something. Okay, and then it's over when you get in the middle of the power band. So you'll have to decide what type of torque you like. Do you like that long pull? Then a sport bike would be better suited for what you're going to be for what you're going to like. If you like just gobs of power and it just comes on and it's just like top speed all of a sudden, then you're going to like a cruiser. Okay. The dual sports, they are very gentle bikes. They have low horsepower, moderate horsepower, and moderate torque. Okay, they're going to they probably will feel more like a Harley or cruiser, because their torque comes on low in the power band, 2500, 3000 RPM, and again by 6000 RPM it's over, and their red line's probably not, you know, more than 8000 RPM. And so but they're gentle bikes. They make excellent first bikes. If you're looking for a good first bike, the best first bike, then I'm not going to tell you a Yamaha or Honda or whatever. I'm going to tell you a dual sport. They all, most of the Japanese guys make dual sports, and you'll get a good bike no matter what brand that you get, okay? Because they're all reliable. They're all very similar. They feel the same. They're you know, they're good bikes. Okay. If adventure riding is, let's talk about that horsepower and torque. It's adventure bikes make good horsepower and they make good torque. Not the highest of either, but they're good, solid horsepower and torque. They pull hard and they pull for quite a while. That's what I ride. I like the adventure bikes, and I'll tell you why. Because the comfort is a big deal to me, and that's something you have to consider. Sport bikes are the most uncomfortable bikes out there, and probably the cruisers are probably the most comfortable, because they stick your feet out in front of and you kind of lean back and in a more relaxed manner. Okay, the dual sports and the adventure bikes, they're very comfortable as well. Now, what makes a sport bike uncomfortable? Because it's called crotch rocket, and for a reason. They're designed to go fast, and you need to be leaning over and have really good aerodynamics, really good aerodynamics when you're riding that bike. You need to get out of the wind, and you need to lean over and get behind that tiny windscreen that they have, and because if you're going to go that fast, the wind's just going to wear you out and try to take you off that bike. The cruisers, they're very comfortable, like I said, because they put the foot pegs are out in front, and you lean back, and that's pretty comfortable. The dual sports and the adventure bikes, you're sitting up straight. Your back's going to be more straight. You're not going to have the leaning over like a sport bike and all the weights on your wrists. If you'll notice, if you don't believe that, then you look at the next time you see a guy riding on the interstate on a sport bike. He's got a definitive look. His right hand is on the gas. His left hand is on his left thigh. He doesn't have two hands on the handlebars unless he's weaving in and out of traffic. If he's just sitting there cruising along, then he's got that left hand sitting on that left thigh because his wrists are aching and his legs are cramped up, and you can see the back of his feet. You look at a guy riding on a Harley, you see the front of his feet if he's coming towards you. But if you're behind a sport bike guy, you see the back of his feet because he's in a rocket position. He's supposed to be leaning over and in a rocket position. Now with dual sports and the adventure bikes, you're sitting up. The pegs, the bikes are taller. Every bike manufacturer wants to get the pegs away from the road, because when you lean over in a curve, if your pegs dig into the road, then they're going to raise the wheels off the road, change shift the weight of the bike, and you're going to crash. So they want them high enough that they don't dig into the asphalt. And so and sport bikes and cruisers are short bikes. They're very short, so you can definitely plant your feet on the ground fully, but because they're shorter and those pegs have to be high enough off the road, then now you have less distance between the seat and the pegs for your legs to be comfortable. Now with dual sport bikes and adventure bikes, they're taller, and so they're going to get the pegs up off the road like all the other bikes, but then you're going to have an extended distance between the seat and the pegs, and your legs are not going to be so cramped, and you're going to be able to ride longer in comfort. Okay, so those are some things. The torque and the horsepower, that's going to affect how much pleasure you get out of the bike. The comfort, that's going to affect how much pleasure you get out of the bike. Engines, let's talk about engines. You hear a lot about engines. Singles, 1 cylinder. Twins, 2-cylinder bikes or pistons. Triples, 3 cylinders. Inline 4 cylinders. None of those have an advantage over the others regarding horsepower and torque. They can all make weak horsepower, or they can all make weak torque, or they can all make great horsepower or large horsepower and large torque. So what's the deal? The thing that I found regarding an engine, what I look for in an engine, whether I don't really care whether it's a triple or an inline 4 or whatever, is the fact that you're going to have vibrations on any engine. Now, vibration is the parts of the motorcycle moving back and forth, and how fast they move back and forth is the frequency. So everything is in motion, even in your body. The nerves and the bones and your body is in motion. You don't even know that. It's generating an electronic signal, and even the planets and the stars and everything, they're in motion. They're moving back and forth. Everything in the universe moves back and forth. Okay, now the frequency is how fast. And so what happens when you hear guys talking about numb hands, or you've experienced numb hands, that means the frequency of that bike, that engine, has found the harmonics in your nervous system, in your hands and the bones of your hands, and they found those harmonics and they're tuned in, and then your hands go numb. Okay, so the higher the frequency, the higher the risk that the motorcycle's going to find the frequency within your body. Okay, if the pistons in a motorcycle are side by side, it's going to have a higher frequency, and frequency does get higher as you go up the RPM range. So every motorcycle, the engine vibrates faster as the RPMs get higher, but inherently faster are the twins, the parallel twins. I'll be very specific. Parallel twins, the pistons side by side. Inline 4, the pistons are side by side. So 4-cylinder, they're side by side. A triple, which is mostly your Triumphs, or MJ09 for Yamaha. They're not a lot of those out there. Those are side by side pistons. They vibrate higher. The ones that tend not to find the frequency of the harmonics in your hands and your feet are the Boxer twins. That's a BMW and a Pose twin. The V twins, those are Harleys and cruisers. The pistons are at like 45 to 90 degree angles to each other. And singles, the single cylinder. So those vibrate just like, they're an engine. They vibrate, but the frequency is much lower, and it is more unlikely to reach the harmonics in your hand and make you make your hands numb, and make your butt numb, make your feet numb. So that is something to consider, and that's what. And so I don't have necessarily a favorite engine that I like for torque or horsepower. I have favorite engines that I like for the frequency. I love a V twin. I just love those, and I love singles. I like the thump 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 thump. The thumper is another name for a single, because the engine thumps when it's at idle. I love those. That's what I look for. The low frequency vibrations to me are it's the definitive characteristic of an engine. I know that I'm throwing my leg over a motorcycle and I'm riding one because of the feel of that engine, and I like that low frequency vibration. The sound of the engine, that could be another thing. I found motorcycles where I didn't like the sound of the engine, or I really loved the sound of the engine. That didn't necessarily change the fact whether or not I would buy that bike, but I love the rumble and the growl of a twin, and I love the thump of a single. Not a big fan of the triple. To me, it sounds like it's wheezing. Okay, it's like it's asthmatic. It kind of whistles. And the inline four, people say that sounds like a jet engine or a turbine engine. I kind of think, to me, it kind of sounds more like a kitchen implement, but you know, everybody's got their opinion. But anyway, so pleasure is affected by torque and horsepower. It is affected by the type of the engine and how the bike makes your body feel, and the sound of the engine will actually give you pleasure, or you won't care for it. You'll develop that, you know, over a period of time, what you think there. Comfort, if you buy a bike with a smaller gas tank, you're going to have to get off more often. That could be a good thing, because the more often you stop and get gas, the more you can stretch your legs. Cruisers tend to have the smallest tanks. Adventure bikes tend to have the largest tanks. That's why they're more suitable for touring, though some cruisers are designed for touring, your big Harley baggers. And so you got to consider comfort when you're riding. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, if it comes down to the vibrations ends up being a problem, well, I've found a way to overcome that for most bikes. If it's extreme, then it can't be overcome. But for many bikes that I've owned that I didn't like the vibrations, I put on neoprene sleeves over the hand grips, and I use grip puppies, and then I've put on rocks, ROX, rocks handlebar risers. I always like to raise the handlebars up and pull them back no matter what I'm riding, because I started out on dual sports. I rode those for much of my young life, dual sports and singles, single engine motorcycles, and I like the upright feeling. I feel in control. I don't feel in control on a sport bike, and I don't like cruisers because my feet are extended out, and my brain over the years has learned to where the brake is on a motorcycle. And so if I need to make an emergency stop and you can't think about that, those kinds of things, it could save your life in the fact that you don't have to try to stop and take those few seconds and think what to do. Your brain just automatically knows, cover the clutch, go for the handbrake, go for the rear brake at the same time, and my left foot automatically just starts cranking down the gears, and I automatically when I get to first gear, it automatically let go of the clutch, and the engine braking of the bike, that rear wheel locks up. That's just the way I've learned safety over the years. And if my feet are out like on a cruiser, I'm probably in a safety situation. Without thinking, I'm probably going to take my right foot and put it backwards to where I think the pegs should be and hit that brake, and there's not gonna be anything there. So that's just me. So anyway, I hope that this helps you if you answer these questions honestly, and then you're going to narrow your field down tremendously, and then you're going to go sit on those bikes and you're going to test ride them, and you're going to pick out the right bike for you. I guarantee you this is going to help you. So good luck with your search for a bike, and I hope you find one that you really enjoy riding.